Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pathways to Family Wellness podcast. My name is Dr. Brendan Reardon, pediatric and family chiropractor. And joining me today, we have Dr. Linda Slak, who's a local by us, but has a very unique skill set. Linda, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Brendan.
Yeah. Absolutely great to have you here. And what I want to do is go ahead and read your bio, and then we'll jump into some conversation topics because you do have a very unique skill set, and that's part of why I was really excited about having you on the podcast here. So go ahead and read the bio here. Dr. Slak is an accomplished pediatric chiropractor with more than 35 years of experience and the proud owner of Slak Chiropractic and the Slak Institute. Her experience includes certifications in pediatrics through the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, and she is a fellow of the American Board of Child Developmental Disorders through the Academy of Functional Neurology. She has been at the helm of Slak Chiropractic along with her husband, Dr. Jean-Marc Slak, dedicated to offering gentle and precise care since 1987. It has been a journey, hasn't it been?
It definitely has.
Yeah.
It feels like yesterday.
Yeah, I can imagine. We were just speaking about that before we were recording. It is truly amazing. And as I understand it, working with kids with specific developmental, neurological specific issues, it wasn't necessarily how you started out in practice, but it has something that you've had specialty in over the past couple of decades. And so I'm wondering if you're able to lead us through how you got into that, what inspired you to get into that, things parents might want to know. We can just open it wide open, broad for that if you'd like. So.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, one of my practice members asked me about this yesterday. So, like, how did you get into this?
Yes.
So, really, it started off with our daughter because our family is built of three main left brain geeks.
Okay.
So, and then our daughter comes along and she's this creative right brain uh, child who thinks differently and works differently. And she had a specific diagnosis eventually of dyslexia.
Hmm.
And so going through school with her learning difficulties, which were mild, but still she was on an individualized education plan, an IEP, we call it.
Hmm.
And going through school, we and raising her, it was a very good education process. And for me, it triggered me to want to learn more about the brain and brain development in the first years of life.
Hmm.
So I went on to study neurology and then also got my certification in pediatrics through the ICPA
Yep.
and onward to about 15 years ago, where the other Dr. Slak said, your skills are just so far ahead of me. Why don't we've always had a family practice, but why don't you see all the kids and I'll see all the adults?
Yeah.
So since that time, that's how our practice has been split. I see about 90% infants actually in practice.
Wow. What a beautiful thing. And for our listeners to know as well, the chiropractic education entails lots of neurology to begin with. So even a chiropractor who doesn't have this unique specialty has a tremendous amount of training in neurology, but you've taken it up a step even more at that point to try to really understand, what was happening. And I'm curious with the case of your daughter as well. Were you finding that there weren't like you were having trouble figuring out tools to properly like work with her or help her beyond like the knowledge that you had already had? Is that part of how you got into that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I searched, there were, I'm a research person.
Yep.
So I looked for anything that I could find and in the natural world actually, because we chose not to medicate our daughter.
Yep.
So we did everything possible and creatively to get
Yes.
her to learn in the best possible way and get her off onto college in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. And now what are some in terms of when you're talking to parents about neurology, they're developing babies, what are some key things you think are good for parents to understand about the nervous system?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that none of us usually realize is that the rapidness of brain development in the first 3 years of life.
Yes.
So from 0 to 3, the brain is building billions of connections between neurons in the brain. It's the most rapid period of development ever in life.
Yeah.
So it's so important that we nurture the infant from 0 to 3 with good, positive experience.
Yes.
So all through their life. So from like in the very beginning of life too, we need to nurture those milestones and realize that, for example, from 0 to 3 months, that infant is laying flat for a reason. And the minute that we bring them into upright posture, if we bring them up into upright position too long, too fast, we will most likely or might skip some major milestones because we engage the higher centers of the brain right away in upright posture. So before the baby's ready.
Yes.
So the brain develops from the bottom up, and
Okay.
we need to start and nurture that development through all the stages
Yeah.
until the baby's upright and starting to walk.
Well, that's fascinating. And I'm wondering if we can jump into some of that. You said the baby's on their backs for a reason. What are some of the reasons? We can go into the weeds a little bit if that's okay, because I always find this fascinating to understand. Or I guess to put it another way, whenever we understand this at a deeper level, to me, it just lends more evidence to the wisdom of the body, that there's so much wisdom within these bodies of ours, and there's so much purpose to how everything unwinds. And so I'm curious if, through your experience, what you feel like the purpose is, or neurologically the purpose for a baby not to be as upright and to be more flat for those first 3 months of life.
Yeah. So the reason being in the very first, because of the brain at birth, the infant is utilizing the lower, like about 25% of their full brain potential.
Okay.
So they're working off of the brainstem, which is where all of our instinctual reflexes come, or those primitive reflexes
Yes.
that we're born with. So in the beginning of life, those reflexes are there for survival, to
Yep.
allow the infant to survive, suck, swallow, breathe, move specific movements.
Yes.
And then as they grow through their milestones, those reflexes then inhibit, or they go to sleep. They never go fully away. They're always
Yes.
there for protection if
Yes.
there's any kind of intervention in the future or severe stress. But they get replaced by higher postural reflexes. So we need to go through those milestones properly and in order. And what's the miracle of life? It happens naturally. We don't need to like tell the baby what to do.
Yes.
And so same thing as in the fetus in development, from 2 cells in 40 weeks to become this infant in the world. We don't do there's nothing we need to add, right? It
Yeah.
happens naturally. So after the infant's born, we need to nurture those milestones and nurture the infant. So by giving them freedom of movement.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting how I feel like so often we're trying to shortcut things with like devices or gadgets or things like, how can we shortcut this? And a communication piece I have with some of the folks in our practice, I'm sure you do as well, is that, slow is fast, or just how should we do this? Well, what would a baby have done naturally on their own? They wouldn't be in held in devices or propped up for long periods of time. There would be, if we almost have to rewind a lot of the thinking that we have around how we've been told in the conditioning we're supposed to raise our children. And there's a lot more of just allowing them to be, and then the development unfolds on its own, which is, the miracle of life once again, I think.
Right. So it's a beautiful thing to watch. And I think parents today having the ability to, we now have paternity leave. So both
Yeah,
parents are coming into our practices, and it's not just mom anymore. And so they have more time to watch the development and be amazed. And
sure.
I remember during the pandemic, one mom who came in, it was baby number 3. And like when the baby rolled, she came in all excited. My baby rolled over today for the first time. I never got to see that with my other kids because she wasn't home. She was always working. And so oftentimes we miss those amazing developmental changes in the infant.
Yes. Well, and it's worth noting as well, I didn't mention this before. Dr. Slack does teach an advanced course for the ICPA, which is a lovely one. I've taken it recently. And it goes in depth into some of these things that for me, even with all the training I had already had, there was a lot of really great new information in there. And so another one of the piece which you had mentioned as well, that piece about lying flat to help development. How is it for a baby that early upright posture might inhibit things? And we're talking about early upright. A parent might think like, is it okay if I hold my baby in a, if I'm holding them to my chest, is that going to inhibit it, or are we still going to be okay if they're held in like a sling, for example, or some type of a baby wearing or things of that nature, right?
Right. So a baby sling, if they're not fully upright, is okay. It doesn't count.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
But being in a car seat, so
Yep.
oftentimes like if you're out in the car seat and the baby falls asleep and you just say, oh, I'm just going to bring the car seat inside and let
Yeah.
the baby sleep in the car seat, that is considered upright posture. So in the time of 0 to 3 months, by the way, it should only be like 1 to 2 hours max per day.
Yep. So that would include car seat in that time as well, right? Yep. Yep.
Exactly. It
Yep.
would include traveling in the car seat if you're going to taking the baby to daycare, for
Yep.
example, or going anywhere on a trip. And if it happens once in a while, it's okay.
Of course. Of
It's
course.
like constant. So a baby, like let's say you have a colicky baby, give some example of what would
Yeah.
cause a parent to hold them upright. So you have a colicky baby, the parent's holding them all the time. So
Yep.
the baby's being held upright. So two things are being missed here. One is that we're in upright posture. So what does that do? In the upright posture, again, it engages the higher centers of the brain when they're not ready to be engaged yet.
Okay.
So remember we said the brain development begins at that brain stem. And then as the baby begins to lift their head, roll over, sit up, stand, and walk, all of those phases of development, they are going through a normal trajectory of brain development to get them ready for using these higher centers.
Yes.
And that's when they naturally get up to stand, start to cruise on furniture, and then walk. And that happens around 12 to 15 months.
Yeah.
So if it happens before, though, they're skipping those stages and they're going right here. So if they're engaging this higher prefrontal cortex too soon, you can begin to see that we might skip a major milestone down here.
Yes.
And then that's going to affect the child later on. The parent's not going to know or see anything really happening or know that there's a problem probably until they get to school.
Yep.
Because then when they get to school age and they go to school, they have to, they're not learning experientially anymore. Everything's coming in, higher learning's coming in. We call it top-down integration. They have to learn different skills. And as they do that, they fall apart because they missed some steps along the way. And we call it deflection back to that primitive brain. So, and then the teacher comes and says, your child can't focus in school. It's
Yeah.
having difficulties with reading, etc.
And will these be talking points you'll have with parents to try to trace back and understand where things might have been missed or gone offline at a certain point? And then
Exactly.
I guess the second part is, in order to help a child where that may have happened, are you helping them to like neurologically go back to that point to like work through that piece?
Absolutely. So the beautiful thing is that we can help to correct that at any stage, but the sooner the better.
Oh, yep.
So, no matter what age, you can imagine if you have a 15-year-old, you're going back, you're going to say, I want you to get down on the floor and crawl for an hour every day. They're going to go,
Yeah.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I try to catch them before they get to school, like, age 2, age 3, when the
Yeah.
parents know something's wrong, but they're not sure.
Yeah.
But even before that, that's why I see infants, because if we can see our infants from the beginning of life and nurture them through those stages and help parents to do things to nurture the infant,
Yep.
then what we'll see is we'll get them developing, we'll ensure that the development occurs through those stages appropriate and properly, and therefore less of a chance for that child to have a problem when they get to
Yeah.
school.
And what I found, maybe you can attest to this, is that sometimes when that's happening, it almost appears like things are going slower. Like there's I think like there's a big push in our culture that we want things to go faster. So you might see parents get excited, like, look at little Timmy there, he's already standing up, and he's 4 months old and they can hold him up and he goes into rigidity and like, look, he's standing on his own. Isn't that wonderful? What would you say to those parents?
Yeah. So the biggest thing I get was like at 3 months, the parents will come in and say, oh, that's when they start to put pressure on their feet. And
Yeah.
the parents will go, can we put little Johnny into the jolly jumper, for
Yes.
example? And I say, no.
Yeah.
because we don't want them upright. First of all, is that jumping good for the spine at that age?
Yeah.
Absolutely not, right? The spine's not ready to have gravity pull and be bouncing and weight bearing like that. So but the parents think that's advanced, that my
Right.
baby
Or
my
look
baby
look how happy they are, right? They're in the Jolly Jumper. They're so
yeah, they're
happy.
laughing. They think it's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and the other thing, even way before that, is I'm sure you've had this in your practice where parents will come in with their newborn baby and say, "Wow, he's so strong. He could lift his head from day one,
Hmm.
and also roll to his side." And we know as chiropractors that that's a sign of neural tension in
Yes.
the body. That's stress and tension, but parents think that their baby's advanced.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's just it, right? And it's low tone versus high tone. That's the higher tone baby. Yeah, and there is usually a rigidity in there that can be concerning at times. And now, so we talked about the 0 to 3 months, and something when we were speaking about that, you had mentioned something called primitive reflexes, which I feel like if this were 10 or 15 years ago was not as well known of a concept, but it seems like now even parents are coming in and a lot of other practitioners are checking for that. OTs are checking for that. PTs, we're checking for that. So what is a primitive reflex and what is its purpose?
So a primitive reflex is a neurological reflex that is present naturally to allow the infant, like I said before, to survive in the beginning of life and
Yeah.
then to meet their developmental stages.
Yes.
So to get from lying on their back to then pushing up with their arms to begin to get up on their knees, rock back and forth,
Hmm.
which engages a reflex called the symmetrical tonic neck reflex.
Hmm.
And then they start to transition from there into the cross crawl.
Yep.
So all of those stages would not happen with those instinctual primitive reflexes that are there from the very beginning of life.
Yep. And it's very, I think that an interesting point as well is that we want these here as well to an extent, but we also want them dampened by a certain point. We all in its good time, I suppose, right? But like in an adult, if you're seeing a lot of these, then we know there's a concern. And I think sometimes when it comes to baby movement, we can make the mistake and think that it's like a volitional movement, that these things are happening. No, but the frontal cortex, as you and I sitting here talking, having a conversation, is engaged in a very different way with babies. It's not like they're just like deciding in that sense to like, I'm gonna roll over or rock back and forth. It's very reflexive, right? So,
Right.
that's a good
They go from
delineation.
involuntary movement to voluntary to
Yeah.
through the stages too.
Yeah.
So, and that's very, by 1 year of age, those primitive reflexes should all be inhibited, gone to sleep.
Yes.
Sometimes they're not. And one of the things that would cause them not to be is what we already talked about. If we were holding the infant upright too
Hmm.
long for too many hours in a day and skipping some of those stages,
Yep.
some of those reflexes are going to remain. And we call
Yes.
that a retained reflex. And that could cause many problems, like uh, with ability to being clumsy,
Sure.
awkward, not being good in the child who's not good in sports,
Yep.
not being able to read because they can't cross the midline with their eyes, uh, all types of problems that appear and look exactly like ADD, for example, or ADHD,
Yes.
may not be, because
Yeah.
it may be signs of these reflexes not inhibiting properly from the start.
Are there some ways with a child that would be in the 2 to 3 year range that parents might be able to spot something like this? Like if they're observing the way their child was moving or their behavior to identify it prior to the school age to know this might be worth checking into or getting some more information about?
Yeah, so some of the ways is if their child's awkward and clumsy, tripping over
Yep.
themselves,
Yep.
not having jerky movements, heavy
Sure.
sitting, possibly will tell us that there's low tone in the body and maybe there's an issue that way. Uh, then we wouldn't have, as we get out of the diaper stage, bedwetting could be a
Yep.
sign. So many other, can you think of any other signs?
Yeah, that's, the clumsiness would be a big one. Maybe even some other ones of just like difficulty settling or
Tantrums.
yeah, tantrums. A lot of things might show up that way. I mean, even like digestive issues and any functional issue might potentially could have a correlation back to something like that. Yeah, precisely.
Super
Um,
sensitive to, like,
yeah.
not liking tight clothes or
Yes, there you
excessive
go.
clothes,
Yeah.
sensory issues.
At what
Like,
point would you say it would be normal for a baby to start having, or even a toddler rather, like more fine motor control? You'd like to see be able to, you mentioned like jerky movements or uncoordinated movements. Would you see that even at a very, very young age, for a like more of an infant or anything like that?
yeah, I think that happens gradually. For example, like
Yep.
the baby grasp reflex at 3 to 5 months will turn into pincer grasp.
Yep.
But from 0 to 2, they're really developing. The development is for gross motor control.
Hmm.
So fine motor control, it kicks in with the left brain after from 2 to 5.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Um, And then you'd mentioned some things that parents might be able to look for in terms of like if there's some potential issues that way. And of course, as chiropractors, we think that all kids should have the opportunity to be checked just to see because you'd be surprised what can be found once you start looking. And once you know how to have a fine-tooth comb, a lot more things start showing up. I certainly remember earlier in practice seeing thinking, oh, that baby was just fine. And my wife, Dr. Amanda, had more experience with kids, and she'd be like, "Are you kidding me? There's a lot going on there." And now as we're more in practice, we start to, you can pick up on a lot more nuances to understand just how many kids have little nuances or idiosyncrasies that in the past might have just been like, oh, little Johnny's just a little bit quirky, or they have this going on, but you realize no, there's actually aspects of the nervous system that have not yet been integrated that when integrated will definitely allow little Johnny to reach his full potential in a better way. Um, and I'm wondering if that's something you've noticed or if you can add to that a little bit as well.
Absolutely. And the nervous system is key. We don't give enough emphasis onto the nervous system and taking care of it,
Yes.
right? And parents and most people don't even know that pediatric chiropractic exists or the
Right.
importance of pediatric chiropractors. And ideally, I wish I could be in the hospital to adjust every baby at birth.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing, right? Just check them right then and there. That'd be
Yeah,
cool.
check right then and there, because every
Yeah.
baby, one of my favorite studies from 2015 now was they looked at 100 infants, and they in the first 3 days of life, and they looked for evidence of what we call vertebral subluxation, but what in the osteopathic world they call somatic dysfunction. It was an
Hmm.
osteopathic study. They found 99 out of the 100 of those babies to have nerve interference.
Yeah.
And
Incredible,
so,
right? And that's yeah.
yeah, and these were infants that they classified as having a normal birth.
Yeah.
So not even a traumatic birth. So that means like nearly every infant needs to be checked and have that interference removed from the start.
Yeah.
I know that you've probably noticed, and I've noticed in practice, that parents, after they begin care with their infants, they start saying, wow, like the baby becomes so calm and
Hmm.
like turns into a whole different baby and is so they have such a wonderful experience, and then they continue into wellness care
Yep.
after the problem that they initially came in with.
Yep. And I always think about that and I think it's amazing that almost should be normal function, right? That's that's normal function, but normal function seems so uncommon these days. But that's normal, right? Right?
Mhm.
Um, but how would you differentiate for parents between high tone versus low tone? I know I hear a lot of conversation about tone as well. I guess, or when we're talking about tone, what are we speaking about?
So when we talk about tone, we're talking about overall tone of the body. In an infant, it would look like we're talking about hypertonicity or
Yep.
hypotonicity.
Yep.
So we have specific tests that we do on the infant to see, checking for bringing the arm across the chest, for example.
Yeah.
If it goes across the midline, then we know that that's like hypotonicity. There's not enough tone within the
Hmm.
system. If it won't come across enough, that would be hypertonicity. And we see more hypertonicity, I think, than hypotonicity in
Yes.
general, where the babies are coming in and they're just so tense and they're so tight. And then when we remove the nerve interference and we correct the subluxation, we free the nervous system, and that's what we restore tone, normal
Yeah,
tone.
absolutely. And I feel like a lot of parents bring in their, especially for the moms bringing the kids in, almost like they sense that something's not quite right, but they're not quite sure the specifics of it. And I know for our office, a lot of the work we've done has been very validating for parents to know, like, something just, they seem so rigid that just didn't seem normal to me. Have you found that to be true as well, to be able to put a language to it for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And the beautiful thing with the parents is that they do recognize that.
Yes.
And as a new parent with your firstborn, oftentimes it's hard to detect and or know what's normal and what's not normal.
Right.
Like, what's normal spit up? What's normal gassiness? Is that,
Yes.
doesn't every baby have some type of gassiness in the beginning of life?
Right.
So all the more reason for them to come and get to be checked by in our offices, so that we can determine if there is a problem and then correct it and
Yeah.
take remove the interference.
Now, what I'm seeing a lot is almost a dismissing of things from some conventional avenues that are actually issues. Folks will go into a conventional practitioner and they're almost told, like, oh, don't worry about that. We can check that when they're later. Um, and I guess it seems to me like the what's the question behind that is, like, the bar is getting lowered to where, like, oh, well, your child's like breathing and they're gaining weight, so they're healthy, right? Like, it's like that's the
Yeah,
metric now, instead of optimal function. And I'm curious if you're noticing that in your community as well.
absolutely. And when they are not, like, basically the main concern is weight gain that they're
Yes.
monitoring. And if they're not gaining enough weight, then there's pressure on the mother, like, to say, oh, your milk supply is too low,
Yeah.
and the baby's not getting enough. So here's some formula, try that. Uh, but let's, like, you've heard about constipation.
Mm.
Uh, in your opinion, I don't know, in your opinion, is it okay to be constipated for 5 days, 7 days, 10 days?
I mean, that's not optimal function right there. So no.
Oh, that's not optimal function.
Yeah.
And so we're hearing parents coming in and say, I
Yeah.
was told that was perfectly normal. And I say, not on my watch, because actually, when the baby receives the chiropractic adjustment, they usually poop before they leave the office,
Yeah.
don't they?
Yeah.
That's
The
like,
poop, the poop button. Yep.
and you hear that from parents. Parents learn that, like, I remember one mom who had a colicky baby who brought, and within a couple of weeks, no more call, the baby was calm and back to normal. And she went back to the pediatrician and said, you told me that this would go away by a year. Like, you wanted me to wait 12 months for this to resolve itself. Like,
Right.
it's like, I tell parents, like, why don't you go back and say, here, take my baby for a week and then come back and tell me that there's nothing
Yes.
that we can do, that we just have to live with it.
And now, how do you feel about the fact that crawling was removed from some of the developmental milestones?
Crawling is the most important one,
Yes.
like, in everybody's opinion.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I guess, do you know why that was? I'm trying to look at, and when that was, this was a couple years ago, I think, when the updated guidelines came out from the
right.
CDC. And I was
Yeah.
trying to read arguments in favor of it, and they weren't very convincing to me. It seemed like a really, like, loose, like, well, we've seen some babies that are perfectly healthy like that. And I'm like, I would love to evaluate those children that they're labeling as perfectly healthy to see, like, if, from our opinion, would that still be the case? So, but yeah,
I have a lot of moms who are PTs, OTs, and
yes,
in that world, what they say is that because of the back to sleep movement and the lack of tummy time.
yeah,
Okay, when my children were born, they slept on their tummies.
yep,
So they got tummy time naturally. Now we need to actually, it's an activity that must be done. Like,
yeah,
we have to make time to do tummy time during the day. So they feel that because the infants are placed on their back for sleeping and they're on their back all night long, that they're not on, because they're not on their tummy, they're not developing those skills and will miss crawling. They'll also miss crawling if they're held upright too long.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
they're likely to miss crawling. And so because it's become so common, but absolutely not normal,
Yes,
the CDC said, oh, we can just take it out.
I see.
Now, the other thing is that, you know, I have adult patients who say, I never crawled. I saw a lot of feeds where people would say, I never crawled and I'm just fine.
Yeah.
And yeah, because no matter, even if you skip any of those stages that we talked about before, you're not going to stop developing. The child's not going to stop developing. They're just going to compensate,
Yes.
and the brain is going to have to work harder to function and do the same, perform the same things that someone who went through those normal stages did. And it's a question of how long can they compensate for those missteps. And maybe some children can, and it'll never be detected, but others are going to show up with deficits and it'll show up in higher learning, as we talked
Yes.
about before.
I think that's such a good point about the compensation, right? So like it's our body's so amazing that it's going to figure out a way around it, but like at what cost does that come? And I always think when people say I'm just fine, I think like, well, let's define what just fine means. Let's define our terms a bit here. Because even with that person, even if there's nothing detectable on the surface, you might scratch away and realize, oh, that person actually has a lot of difficulty focusing for long periods of time, or reading, or following instructions, or tracking their eyes from one side to the other, or they can't stand on one leg, but they can stand on the other leg. Like there would probably be something functionally that would show up that might cue you into the fact that that brain, when you start to stress the brain, you're going to see the compensation system fall apart, right? So then, that's where, yeah.
Yeah, and then they don't even realize it because they are functioning, they're functioning well, and
Right.
they got through life, and
Yes.
they got to their careers and their families,
Yeah.
and when
But there's
normal.
a yeah, there's a whole nother level of optimal function though, right? UPR, I mean, we see that with folks we take care of all the time where people are like, wow, I didn't realize how good my body would feel and function until we started doing this, start to do things that they thought were just a natural process of aging or anything like that. And you start to realize, well, maybe it didn't have to happen in that trajectory. If the body can function at optimal level, a lot of these things that we think are common become less common.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
precisely. Now I'm wondering is there any other points for our parents about developing nervous system you think is good for them to know?
Well, I think that that it's important for every parent to realize that the nervous system is the most important system of the body, because the nervous system controls and coordinates
Yes.
everything in the human body. And that chiropractors are the ones, we're masters of the nervous system, and the brain is sending signals down through the nerves in the spine that go out to supply and give function everywhere. If there's interference there's going to be dysfunction in the body. We don't usually see that dysfunction until we get a symptom,
Yes.
whether it's pain or indigestion or some other type of organic issue. And if we keep our nervous system healthy all through life and get checked regularly, then we will catch those issues before they ever become a problem. We don't let them sit and become an issue in the future.
Beautiful. Yeah. Chiropractic today for a better world tomorrow.
Oh, there you go.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Slack, for joining us. Really appreciate your time and joining me on this conversation. How are some ways that folks can get connected with more of your information and more of your work?
So you can go to drslak.com. That's our office website,
Yeah.
and reach me directly if you would like to.
Yeah.
lslackdc@gmail.com.
Awesome. And the Slack Institute as well, that's more designed just for chiropractors? Or is there information for the lay public there as well?
That's for teaching chiropractors.
Yep. Precisely, yeah. Some of the magic of neurology, which, it really does seem like magic sometimes when you look at this, about how amazing this nervous system of ours is. It's such a fascinating thing to study. So appreciate your
And there's always
contribution.
more to study.
There is always more to study. It's fascinating. Yeah, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much, and look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Hi, everyone. We're back real quick. We were speaking afterwards and realizing something that I think would be a great communication piece is we see with some of these infants, development is going great, and then the infants get sent off to daycare. And so parents might feel like, it's out of my hands at that point. So I'm wondering if we can speak to that. We were just talking about that a bit. So you can
Yeah,
jump
so we
in.
were talking about how seeing parents who actually sometimes you get an app where you can view your child or infant at lunchtime and take a look, or they'll send you pictures. But if there's an app, or if you're able to look in video and you can see what's going on in the daycare. I've had parents report back that not their child, but maybe the child next to them, was brought in the car seat asleep, and the daycare providers just left them in the car seat for hours, or they put them in the jolly jumper or a
Yeah.
swing
Yeah.
or an upright posture too long. So as parents, you have the right to go in and say, hey, I want my baby 90% of the day to be in free play on a blanket down by themselves, or in a play yard area, to get as much free movement as possible. Don't put them in an upright posture too long, except,
Yep.
you give them instructions and they will follow.
And you'd recommend that for basically all ages, right? For all ages of kids that might be in a daycare setting like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate that, tacking that on. I think that's a great educational piece, because I know we get that question a lot.